Welcome, everybody. We'll do a sound test. Those of you who are in the Zoom, if you could, somebody could respond in the chat if you can hear audio.
Yeah.
Got some sound good. Okay.
Yeah, lots of people saying they can.
All right. Well, thank you. It's good to be together, at least virtually. This is the first meeting we've had in a while where we didn't have any assessment directors come to the in-person portion of our hybrid meeting. That's okay.
It could be second traffic if they're coming.
That's true. There was some serious traffic challenges coming southbound.
And I think we should let them know that because they did not come in person today, they're missing donuts.
There are donuts, thanks to Megan Lopez. Let's go ahead. If we can go to the first slide, start learning intentions. While I put that up, I want to take a moment to talk about gratitude and challenge each of you on the meeting to think for a minute about something that you're grateful for today. That could be something small or big, work-related or personal. And then if you'll put that in the chat, share that out so the rest of us can enjoy your gratitude. And while you're doing that, I'm going to share some things that I'm grateful for since I have the microphone, so I'll take liberty of doing that. I'm grateful for the professional community that the assessment directors and the assessment accountability team represent here at the State Board of Education and across our state. I'm going to share a couple of specific examples to highlight why I'm feeling that way. I regularly feel that way, but today a little bit more so than usual. If you watched our last board meeting, you saw a recognition of a student from Wasatch County School District who came in and talked, and it just highlighted for me how important it is that we focus on individual students. Sometimes, certainly our partners that we work with in education and assessment anyway, it's difficult for them to see the student as an individual because of just the nature of their work. In this particular case, this student had been given an ECT test with the wrong Braille code. I can't remember if it was Nemeth was the wrong one or Nemeth was the right one that they needed. When ACT was informed about that, they are policy driven, and so they often look to their policies and say, well, here's what you've got to do. And we had a number of people probably in that student's individual personal life and in her classroom, as well as individuals here at the State Board of Education that saw her as an individual student with needs and advocated for her. And we were able to rectify that problem. And then subsequent to that, Cache District had a power outage on the day of their ACT administration. One of their schools, the power was out for, 20 or 30 minutes, I think. It disrupted one of the subtest administrations. No fault of the school, no fault of the students, just one of those circumstances. We communicated well between Cache District and our team. We began engaging ACT. And again, they looked to their policies, and their policies indicated the students would need to retake the entire test. Through professionally advocating on behalf of the individual students and the experiences that would bring for them, we were able to get ACT to respond differently than their standard policy. It's just, I'm grateful that we work in a place where we can look at individual problems and challenges, approach them with a attitude of overcoming those challenges and finding good solutions. And that's something I'm grateful to be part of. And again, these two examples I give start with your communities and the LEAs and the schools and districts, and we're grateful to be part of that as well. Go ahead to the next slide, please. I'm going to look too.
They're very nice messages, so I haven't read them. Okay, there you go. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. Now you've got me distracted. Part of the value of sharing gratitude is it can lift other people as well. So I'll come back to those. This is the quote. It's out of one of the books that I'm reading, but this quote I want to attribute to the author of it. Gratitude is not only the greatest, but also the parent of all other virtues. I found that to be true in my life, and look for opportunities to build that virtue and encourage each of you to do so as well. All right, next slide, please. So recently completed board meeting actions. The reading benchmark contract was approved in March. So we're continuing to move forward with that implementation. We had started that before we got the contract signed with the intention of being able to do that. And we're working forward. We'll keep, obviously, you posted. There'll probably be discussion about this later in our meeting today. As we move into the 24-25 school year, we're excited to be able to hopefully have improved rostering and other features available through this contract. Next slide, please. So upcoming board meeting, 404, the requirements for assessment that went through committee at our last meeting, and it'll be in front of the full board along with the standard test administration and testing ethics policy for Utah educators. That includes changes related to the two-proctor requirement and defining those roles, as we've talked about in this meeting previously. A 406 early learning program, we had a study session that went for just about 2 hours, I think, on Friday. The board was very engaged with that discussion. It was really refreshing. They were fully engaged. Sometimes all of us, including board members, can get distracted in meetings where we'll be on our computers. We'll have other things going through our mind during discussion that maybe doesn't seem as relevant to us. And I would like to acknowledge that our board was fully present during the bulk of that discussion, and that's scheduled to come back before the board next month. Continue to work on our contract amendment with CAI for item development. Got the most recent copy of that in our hands. We're reviewing it. We'll send it back to them, and hopefully by next week that'll be finalized. And then APAC nominations. We are still looking for an elementary. I still don't have any nominations for an elementary principal for APAC. So I would, again, extend an invitation. If any of you have elementary principals that you think would be good contributors, or if you have an interest in having your district represented on this committee, the elementary position, I don't have any applicants. I do have applicants for local board members, as well as member with expertise in dealing with students with disadvantages. And then just for your awareness, the Finance Committee, they have an agenda item for a statewide student information system. The reason I put this on here is it could relate to the assessment community, because the way that we roster students currently, where we have to take information through your individual student information systems, they get transformed, come through UTREX, get put into our database, and then we work with our vendors for a one roster API from that source to them. It results in delays of rostering, as I think almost all of you are familiar with. When you make a change on a student's schedule, it can take 48 hours for that to show up on a test roster. On the statewide student information system, if that item goes forward, as the board's discussing, eventually somewhere down the road, that would bring enhancements and streamlining processes for rostering. All right, next slide, please. I'm going to spend a few minutes, and I'm going to go through these slides pretty quickly, but there's a link in the slides that we put out to this academic impact and recovery in Utah during the COVID-19 pandemic. In 2021, we contracted with the Center for Assessment to come in and evaluate the impact of the pandemic. This is a subsequent follow-up study that we contracted with the Center for Assessment to conduct on our behalf. That study is completed, and it's 508 compliant and posted on our website. And I'm sharing that with this group today. I think I'm scheduled to spend some time with the special education directors at one of their upcoming meetings. This one will take some time to get through. So again, when you have some time to look through that, it's got a lot of technical detail in there. We'll just hit some highlights this morning. Next slide, please. So this just highlights that we're going to look at. We look at the 3 periods: the 2021, the impact of the pandemic; 2022, the academic recovery year 1, and then we identify in the report academic recovery year 2. And we have a benefit in Utah because our standards have been relatively consistent. We are able to look at longitudinal data in ways that a lot of states aren't in a position to be able to do. Next slide, please. On our following slide, we're going to go into the system level recovery versus student level recovery perspective, a little more detail. But the reason for providing both of these, you'll see there in our last sentence, is to counter the prevailing narrative that education system continues to suffer because students lag behind their pre-pandemic levels of attainment. So it's the reason that we decided to look at the system level as well as the student level in this report at the statewide level. Next slide, please. So you'll see here a definition when we talk about, when you read in the report, system level versus student level recovery, you'll see how we're using student growth percentiles for our system level recovery, and we're looking at achievement levels for the student level recovery. The next two slides are just visual, and I've put in red. These come out of the report or presentation that the individual who has contracted with to conduct the report put in place. Again, a visual depiction of what system level recovery is looking at is cohort based, and then also student level recovery, the cross-sectional comparison for RISE. Next slide, please. So this is a summary of year one. I want to take just a moment to go through these bullets. First one, we see several positive trends in Utah that we should be happy about. Obviously, we see things always that we need to address, especially some of our underprivileged students in our state. There's really no landmark surprises through the study, but I want to highlight a few of these. Both ELA and mathematics, learning acceleration was at least as much to be considered stabilization, and in many cases could be considered genuine recovery. Compared to a dozen other states that the center conducts these analysis, Utah comes out as the best in terms of pandemic recovery. And then despite robust recovery, students remain slightly behind the 2019 levels in ELA and more so in mathematics. Recovery year two, rates of learning on average are slightly exceeding or at pre-pandemic rates of growth. So the system has recovered and then some. Again, that's the good news portion of it. Student attainment on average is still lagging behind because rates of learning have not accelerated enough to catch students up. So one of the things you'll read in this report is this emphasis on really trying to, in order to recover from the pandemic for these individual students, we have to accelerate the rate of their learning to make up for the lost instructional experiences they encountered previously. Next slide, please. Our conclusion, obviously, I think we all can speak very well to the first bullet. And also the second bullet, I think all of us are pretty familiar with this. Again, this is report documents those effects in our state and allows us some future point potentially to do additional study to see growth or changes since this report was completed. And this one's just, I see this now, it's just a bunch of words. Go to the next slide, please.
It was the conclusion of your other
Yeah,
slide.
yeah. Okay, so one of the things we asked the Center for Assessment to do is to look at outliers, positive outliers, really. And so here's a definition. When you read the report, you'll see more detail about this, but there's also an Excel file that was provided in the email that went out today that contains these outlier schools, more information detailed about those schools. Some of you will see schools from your LEA in the outlier report. It may or may not surprise you to see those schools described in the way that we see them from the way we analyze the data post-pandemic. But these definitions are here. And then, again, I would encourage you in your LEA to review, especially those that had minimal impact, large recovery. That would be the ideal scenario for all of our schools, right? That through the pandemic in the impact phase, it was minimized somehow. And then since then, they've seen large recovery. That would be the type of accelerated learning that the report is talking about, the need for more of that. Next slide, please. I've listed here just a few. There's 47 schools that meet the minimal impact, large recovery. I pulled out a few of those. Some of you might say, well, why did you list these schools? There's a personal reason. I just took the ones off the top of the list that I had sorted until I had enough on the screen that I felt like any more would just be too wordy. So it's just, again, it's just an example for you to look at and see that this outlier effort is really designed to help us look closer and try to grow and learn from the experiences that our educators and students are having through this as we come out the back end of this pandemic. We're working with internally with ULead. I've engaged with them a couple of times. We're probably going to contract with another evaluator that will look at these outlier schools closer and try to highlight promising practices that are unique or have some kind of correlational relationship with the outcomes that we're seeing in these schools, with the hope of being able to share those pieces of information broadly across the state. I think most of us will say we know that effective school leadership is critical. That's probably going to be in place in all of these schools, and there'll be other things that we know about education that we expect will be in place. But we also anticipate there could be some things that these schools practices these schools were engaged in that allowed them to achieve this minimal impact and large recovery. So that brings us to an end of my portion of the presentation. We've got a bunch of slides here today, and so I'm gonna not lag. If there are questions, I could take them in the chat or at the end of the meeting to make sure we can get through the content that's related to this assessment windows that are open, and many of them are in full swing now. So thank you.
I just have a few general assessment reminders. Can everybody hear me out there? Or do I need to move closer to the mic? And everyone should join the Nearpod. We only have about 33 people in the Nearpod, and we have over 100 people because I have a couple things that I need people to comment on in my slides. So if everybody could quickly join the link in the Nearpod, that would be great. We're going to survey you on some dates, and we're going to survey you on some questions that we have about training tests. So, and I'm just watching the numbers tick up. So thank you, everyone. First of all, as promised, here are the assessment and accountability task calendars for March, April, and May. As testing has opened, a lot of the tasks that you're responsible for are mainly monitoring and, of course, entering participation codes. And you're going to hear a lot of discussion today about participation codes. And so you just need to be prepared for that. That's another reason why we want you to join, so that if you need to make some comments, we can keep track of the things that we're going to be asking you about today. Quick reminder, we are averaging now about 5 alert papers a day. And so I just wanted to put that reminder in that when you get those, I expect to get notified within 48 hours of your receipt that you've at least received it and you're moving with it. But then I also need you to email me once it's definitely been resolved. I'm going to shout out Greg Wilkie because he writes the best responses of anyone. And I may put some of the things he puts into the AD memo because Greg, you are a rock star on how you respond. Like you address all of the things that are required in our 277, 217.3. This isn't a USBE thing. This is actually policy on making sure kids aren't doing anything for self-harm. And yes, we know that there's lots of kids putting song lyrics and copying and pasting things multiple times. For you as an assessment director, if you get those, that may be a time to have a little chat with the proctoring that's happening in those sessions, because if a student's able to do that through an entire testing session, somebody isn't paying attention to what they're doing. Okay. One of the things that Elise and I have been working on really hard as we've been looking through the UTASFire Plus, moving to the RISE systems, especially for those people who are doing remote summative proctoring, is talking about the need and the continuing use of training tests, because we're noticing more and more schools using the benchmark modules in RISE, especially as, quote, training tests for RISE. That is not what they were designed for, and it's not actually improper instructional use of those when we provided training tests. So what we're wondering about is, because we also have had a couple item writing sessions with multiple people, teachers who come. And one of the things that our team brought to our attention is how many people at those sessions who are very active, engaged teachers saying they didn't even know they existed. And these are not new teachers. These are every teacher that engages with our item writing review items has more than 3 years experience. So we're just kind of wondering, how are you communicating? What's your plan? Do you have any tips for maybe some new ADs? How are you guys communicating the need for students to complete the training tests and the Utah Aspire Plus practice tests, which are like the question samplers, with schools and teachers? How do they know that they exist? Because every single year we get new item types. Every single year there are changes to the tests. Every single year there are updates to technology. And just assuming the students did it in 3rd grade, they would know, is really not good practice. Also, it's great for the teachers, especially if you're concerned about, have they ever proctored? How are they doing it? So show them, talk about it. I have a question in the chat. What are your thoughts on using training tests if they were already using benchmarks? The training tests are designed for 2 different purposes. The training tests are designed actually to familiarize the teachers and the students with every kind of item type on the test. It allows them to communicate with each other. Teachers can put those in front of the whole classroom and make sure that students understand the nuances of haptic items where there's lots of clicks and things they have to drag and drop. Sometimes that can be a challenge for some students, and it's a great way as a teacher, if somebody's kind of concerned, do my students have enough dexterity? Or if there's a concern about, can they hear well, or can they see, or whatever it is, that is the time that they can do that. And it is an open system. They're allowed to practice. If you have students with accommodations, and that includes not just accommodations for students with disabilities, but students who are doing accommodated tests for language. If you use the secure training tests, they can access, and you can ensure that that information is already in the system and they understand how to use it, as well as using it instructionally. The benchmarks are designed as instructional tools as pre and post assessments to gauge how students are achieving standards, not as let's log in, test the system, and then log out. And Lisa and I spent some time yesterday reviewing benchmark usage, and we're seeing many schools where we're wondering about the usage of benchmarks, where we see multiple students logging in, completing one question, and then logging out. And that's it's starting to get some attention. So that's why. So benchmarks have a totally different purpose than training tests. The training tests are designed to train the kids and the students. And so some of the issues that happen when we hear about misadministrations or complications with proctoring or complications with, I didn't know kids couldn't do that, can be resolved very quickly by using the training tests, as everyone's familiar. So it's a really good plan. We're getting lots and lots of responses. And that's part of this thing is too. So I like seeing some people are doing schedules. Some people are going over the beginning. And one of the things about training tests is you kind of have to gauge, if everyone in this class seems to be they understand kind of how all the items work. Remember, especially with clusters, they need to really understand the function. And it's Scotty, you can speak to that if you want to.
Sure, I'd love to.
Can you may, I don't know if you're loud, but
I'm pretty loud. One of the things, especially on the science training test with the clusters, is there's an option there that's not available in the benchmark or on the summative, where the students can actually see how it's being scored, including the dependency scoring that allows students to give multiple different answers, but still get points for it, depending on their thinking. And all they need to do is answer only one question and hit the little pancake thing up the other right-hand thing, and there's an option that says score item, and it'll bring up all the scoring for all the items in that cluster. And so students can get a really good idea that this isn't just an all or nothing. There's only one right answer. There's also multiple paths to get points in this cluster, and they can get a really good idea of what the thinking is. Because it just doesn't say A is the right answer. It says the student demonstrated that they were able to do this in terms of their thinking. And so it's a really nice little addition to the science clusters where you don't get that on the benchmarks. You can have that discussion on the side one-on-one with the kids, but here you can project that training test in front of the whole class and show the whole class how that cluster is being graded. And that's elementary and middle school clusters. And I always tell my middle and elementary teachers, show them the other cluster, show them some of the other stimulations, show them that, because it's not based on the content. It's just based on them being able to see it. So let them see a cluster on how to design a speaker, but then let them see the other cluster of the elementary where the simulation is different. And that's okay. It's not a problem. We're not going to sit there and go, you showed an 8th grader an elementary training test? What were you thinking? No, we're going to applaud that. So show it to them and let them see how these things are graded.
Hey, and one of the comments in here that I'd like to ask, somebody said, my teachers are so confused. They like the benchmarks because they get results rather than spending time on a training test with no feedback. That goes to training them about the purpose of assessments. One of the things that you need to be aware of, and I may ask the math content people and our elementary people to join in with the training test conversation as well. But one of the things you want to think about when you're looking at results for benchmark modules, especially, is if you see students scoring really low, how are you sure that they understood how the item worked or how they are supposed to address that, particularly with math and the equation editors? How are you sure that it's because they didn't understand how the item worked versus they didn't understand the content? The training tests are designed to alleviate that they understand the system versus the content. Anybody have anything you want to say?
I was going to also add because you're kind of speaking to RISE right now within the benchmarks, but also for UA+, the question sampler is different than the student tutorial for the exact same reason. So keep that in mind, whether you're doing the content part of it or the system functionality.
I will add for both ELA and math for RISE, we have clusters now which are approached very differently, and 25% of students are going to see those. So if they have never seen them before, they're going to struggle through that, and you're going to struggle because you won't have seen it either, because they're different on how the students approach that. So it's really important you go through that training test so that when they see that item and that change, that they know how to do it.
And just remember, the benchmarks don't have clusters, right? Cluster is not going to help them prepare for that, or doing a benchmark will not help.
That's why we refer back to the item types. But I really appreciate the feedback you have, and I will aggregate a lot of it, and we will go ahead and we'll send out some tips based on what you responded for. That's why we do this collaboration board, guys. We're not trying to spy on you. We just like to know what's going on. And so it's really important. So thank you very much for sharing it. Now, the next slide is also a poll. We are planning on doing building connections again next fall. And so because we know schools are starting at so many different times, last year we had to pick a date because we had to pick a date. This year, I'd like to give, we have 4 dates that work with all the schedules for 90% of the people in assessment. And so I'm going to ask you guys to go ahead and respond which date would allow you the best internal collaboration within your LEA. And remember that the goal of building connections is to actually allow you to communicate any sort of assessment related topics, schedules, tasks with everyone in your LEA, your district level people in your LEA who are responsible, special education directors, curriculum directors, content staff, if they're, thinking about doing trainings. We're trying to provide as much communication with you so that you're aware of, hey, we're going to be doing some range finding or some item reviews. Want to try to get some people to sign up to do that. We also want to make sure that everyone's aware of the ACT accommodations deadlines, because that is always a sticking point with people forgetting when they need to have those kind of submissions. So that's the purpose of this. And we ask that you're in person together rather than trying to communicate over Zoom. And for those of you who did it last year, you know how complicated it was if you didn't have everyone together versus if they were together. And so we're planning on trying to do a similar format. So would you please we picked Thursdays and Fridays, 2 in August, and a Thursday and Friday in September as well.
I can see how this one might be challenging to respond to because you've got your calendar as an assessment director, but if you're in a large or medium-sized LEA, you're trying to look right now you're trying to figure out, I guess for me, my district have something scheduled on these days.
Right, and it's mainly that. Last year, we scheduled our date and San Juan had mandatory work that they had to do with members of the. So that's what we're trying to avoid. So if you know there's a high level thing, understanding that you still could have a conflict, but if they're, we're hoping to try to get as close to a date where most everybody can do that, so. Thursday, September 12th, is that the,
Yeah,
Thursday,
that's
September 12th. So you may want to put that on your calendar. So that you have a chance to communicate. Questions. The number one question we get words in their target language. Full instruction in their language. Okay. Yep. The number one question we're getting is about what is classroom instructional support. And what that just means is that the students haven't been sitting in a classroom for most of the year with no help in their native language to understand the content that they're then going to be turned around and tested on with RISE or UTASPIRE Plus. So what that means is if a student is their primary language is Russian and no one has really helped them access Russian to English the entire school year, expecting them to sit down and take a RISE test that's been is receiving translated services in Russian, they don't have the academic knowledge for the English side of the test in order to be able to take the test even with a Russian translator. So what that means is you're not instructing the students full time, but they're getting some kind of support. And I know lots of the LEAs are doing wonderful things with certain kinds of electronic translation programs, and we're not talking about Google Translate. And people are providing translation surveys. There's a lot of things that people are doing out there that are really helping, but that's the number one question we're getting. The guidance is the same in here as it is in the UTOP participation and accommodations manual. We've had questions about that, but that's the number one question we get. And the reason why I'm excited we're getting so many questions about it is somehow people have finally figured out that like the RISE test is in Spanish and the UTASPIRE Plus test is in Spanish. And remember, the reason why we only have Spanish adaptive versions, because we get asked this question a lot, it's based on federal guidelines that we have more than 5% of our students, 5%, right, guys? Everyone's not, I have this number memorized and then I think it's wrong. More than 5% of our population has Spanish. And that's why, you know, depending on what state of the union you live in, some tests have more languages. I think, Jessica, you said Texas has multiple ones, so. California has a lot too. Megan, Anne Michelle, Tracy, anybody need to add anything about the language? We good?
Just reach out if
to be translated. Hear me.
you have to stay on. We're working on it. We're working on it.
Can you hear me now? Can you, hello? Can you, I'm.
Come stand by me.
Pull a chair up over here. Let's have a fireside.
Okay, how about now? Yeah, no, yes, mic check.
They said they missed.
Yeah.
Yes, and some people
Perfect.
saying they missed most of it.
Oh, that's okay. I'll start over.
They missed
Okay.
what I said.
Okay, they missed most of what Kim said too? Or just what I said? Okay, so for DLM, what we do is we try to follow along as closely with policies around RISE and Utah Aspire Plus. So if students need the translation component, right, it's being used instructionally, then they are allowed to do that for DLM in the same areas that you can do that translation with RISE and Utah Aspire Plus. Okay.
And again, I linked to the translator guidelines for the state standardized assessments. I also linked to the request form. And I really appreciate some people have been sending me the request forms like, well, we're planning on getting a translator. We want to get the process started. The form is the process. So all I've been telling everybody is send it to me when you have the translator information, because that's what is the form is for. So don't just send me the form without going, eventually we're planning on getting someone. You have to get someone and fill out the form and send it to me. Another really quick reminder, you have to use code 201 for all completed Spanish adaptive and translated summative forms, just like you do for accommodated forms, which we'll talk about some more as well. But code 201 is required. And go ahead and click the slide because the next one is going to address the next question that we get all the time. Okay, we're going to talk about participation codes. As a reminder, we have new participation codes this year. We've retired some, as we told you last spring. And we wanted a couple of questions that we're getting. First of all, you don't have to enter code 200, the standard participation. That is entered after the fact. We apply that after the end of the testing window. A lot of people will email, do I have to sit down and put code 200 in like 10,000 tests? No, you do not, okay? Go ahead and click the slide. This is the number one question we've been getting with code 201 this year. First of all, if a student, EL status is required in all SIS systems. Like if a student is considered EL, ML, please make sure that it's marked in your assessments, in your SIS systems as you're required to do, okay? So if that's happening, you don't have to enter codes 103, 104, or 205. Because what people are emailing and asking us is, if I have a student who should get code 104, do I put 104 in or do I put 201 in? Well, we always tell you it should be in your SIS system, so you don't need to enter 103, 104, or 205. As long as you've got it marked correctly in your EL, in your SIS system, it's coming through UTRUX. Use code 201 so that we know they received the Spanish adaptive tests.
Our codes applied to RISE and Aspire assessments where 6 or less questions were answered.
That's going to be a question that Anne Michelle's going to talk about because you're talking about the 6 or less questions.
Yes. That we get 2 pieces of data back from the vendor. This is not working.
You got to join the fireside.
2 pieces of information from the vendor, which is participation code and test status. So a test that has answered 6 questions, that's a test status. The test has been started. If they answer 85% of the questions and they receive a score, that is a scoreable test. So there are 2 different columns in the table. If that makes sense. Okay. That helps.
So if they answer less than 6, and actually, Malia's going to talk about that too. Malia has a whole slide about this in just a minute.
I think to be clear, you don't have to enter anything if they answer only 6 questions. That's automatic. That test status automatically is detected. So there's nothing you need to do except focus on the participation codes.
Well, the test status then, Michelle, 6 or less would be just non-complete, right?
Right. A non-scorable, started. I can't remember all the different definitions, but that is test status, and it's based on what the student did.
And Malia and Tracy, Malia's going to be talking. We have a special guest today. Malia's going to be talking about the impact of 6 or less in part of her slides. Okay, click the slide for me. Okay, remember code 201. So again, don't forget to apply code 201, accommodated for all Spanish adaptive and translated assessments, in addition to tests that have received accommodations, okay? Click the slide, please. Yep, Maureen.
Fire.
Here it comes. Okay, so I just have a few reminders today, not a whole lot.
Sorry. Questions?
Okay, so if you use Data Gateway to download reports, look at dashboards, you may have noticed that the test scores by teacher report hasn't been functioning properly for the last little while. They have fixed it. You can see current year information right now. That part is working properly. There was an issue with the last year drop down, but I think they fixed that too. I spot checked it, and that seems to be working as well. The link to teacher drop down still not working. They are going to get to that, but they felt the current year and last year was more important. So those should be fixed, and that report should be working for you now. Excellent. Just a few reminders now that we've started the testing window. I'm going to remind you about the end of the testing window. No rush. We do have some data cleanup deadlines for WIDA. The pre-reporting deadline for LEAs is April 4th through April 16th. If you happen to miss some students during that window, it happens, it's common. Just let me know, and I also have a data validation sort of cleanup window, and I can fix those students as well. For Utah Aspire Plus, you have from May 13th, May 15th to get all of your participation codes in. And for RISE, June 11th to June 13th to get all your participation codes in. If you're doing it as you go along throughout the window, then that 2 days at the end should be no problem for you. Next.
We do have a question for you.
Oh, yes.
Can you clarify what linked to teacher is filtering for?
I wish I knew. I do not know. If you ask our data and statistics department, they should be, Malia can tell you, come join the circle.
So the idea of that data is your teachers can look at their data in two different ways to kind of inform their instruction. So when they're looking at their current students that they have, they want to see how those students did in the past, right? And that'll help them make decisions about are there weaknesses that the student has that teacher needs to focus on. And then the linked teacher might be students that the teacher had in the past, and they want to see how the student is doing now. And that informs the teacher as far as how effective their instruction was, and are there areas that they should work on improving within their own instruction.
Excellent. Here's another question. I'm also having a problem with I can't see the chat, guys, so that's part of it. I'm also having a problem with the SPED, student with disability scoring. We are missing 4th and 9th grade students that left are grayed out, but no new students are in the report. We also seem to be missing some current students in the data gateway. This is coming from Rachel. Should she email her? Or just yes. Email? Okay.
Email the whole data. Email the whole data and statistics team. It's data statistics help@schools.utah.gov.
Are your students missing entirely from Data Gateway or just from the report?
How is linked to teacher different than last year's students?
Not sure.
That drop down is a mystery.
You may need to also email data and statistics to ask them, because that's they're in trouble with that.
That would be what that means.
Or maybe it's farther back than just last year. Current student, like there's a current student.
Sorry, I forgot to shut down. Am I ready to do that too?
As soon as we find out, we'll let you know.
A miracle will happen.
All right, so finally, just the same general reminders. If you have a student that isn't rostering for a test, check your UTREX errors. A student with a fatal UTREX error is not going to roster for a test. If you have a new student, if a student has transferred classes, it sometimes takes up to 48 hours for them to show up on the correct roster. Another reminder, if you're contacting us, if you're contacting a vendor, like the RISE help desk, we all just only need SSIDs. That's it. That's all the information we need.
And check your rosters before everybody's going to sit down to test.
Yes.
Please.
And finally, just the same links, core code lists. If you wonder why a student is not rostering, if you have one single student in a class and you wonder why they're not rostering for RISE, check those core codes. And the student rostering manual has all the tiebreakers for duly enrolled students and courses. It's got a ton of good information in it. So I encourage you to read those. And please, if you have any rostering questions, just email me and I'm happy to help. That's it for me.
All right. Morning. Just a few updates for accountability. Join the firefight. In preparation for spring testing, I have updated the accountability technical manual with non-substantive changes. There's no change to the content, except we fixed the broken links that happened when we transitioned to the new website. And there was one participation code that the cell was too short. It was not a big deal, but just so you are aware that there is a new functional accountability technical manual. It does have a version date of March if you want to know the difference, but otherwise the content is the same. If you want to find it, go to the assessment page and then choose resources. Accountability alphabetically is first, so it's very easy to find. I also have it linked here for you in the slides that you can download. Another reminder is one of the changes that we made to participation codes, where we have 204 for parental opt-out. When a parent, if a student started a test or even completed a test, and the parent came to the school with a parental opt-out form, the test had already been given. Previously, we have only had participation code 213 to invalidate that test. Yeah, we only had 204, but if they come after the testing window started, we would use 213 to invalidate that test. We've now bifurcated 213 into two categories. One is truly invalidated. The student cheated. Standardization was broken. The test is truly invalid. And then code 214, where we're invalidating because a parent has requested parental exclusion after the test has been started or after the test has been finished. This will help us keep much better record of the extent of parental opt-out that's occurring in the school, because before we only had invalidated and code 204. Now we'll be able to see if the student was opted out after they started the test. Some future manual updates. We are planning and working closely with the Center for Continuous School Improvement to add information about CSI, ATSI, TSI, identification and exit criteria to the technical manual. This is a request that came from UOD. We are planning on providing that update in June, July of 2024. Typically, the new manual comes out with the school report card. This will be far in advance of that. But we want to have that information about CSI, ATSI, and TSI for you sooner. And one other issue that we have uncovered about merged SSIDs among the myriad of problems that merged SSIDs can cause. It does interfere with student growth percentiles. So just add that to your bucket of things for reasons that merged SSIDs are problematic, and training registrars will have more information coming.
Okay, so you may recall last month I was here talking about indicator 3, particularly in the context of part-time codes and how that can impact your participation rates. And I'm back again to talk some more about particularly indicator 3A, the participation rate, because Tracy and I and the indicator 3 team have been doing some deep dives into non-participation codes. And we found some pretty good information that we thought would be helpful.
Can I just add? Sure. So just for some context, for those of you that may not know what indicator 3 is. So we have 15, 16, 14 indicators, eight. We have 18 indicators that we report back to OSEP, so the Office of Special Education Programming, on it's just all the data on how Utah is doing with our students with disabilities. And one of those indicators is our students with disabilities participating in our statewide assessments, which would be our RISE and Utah Aspire Plus assessments and DLM, as well as their proficiency. So that is one of the indicators that we have to answer to. And those of you that have been around know that your special educators, special ed directors, that trickles down to them. So wherever we have reporting and indicators and compliance and accountability, that moves to you guys into what is called your results-driven accountability, RDA. So your special ed directors may have been contacting you about that, but that's what the indicator data is.
So part of what we do with the indicator data is the state and your LEA all get kind of scored based on whether or not we meet goals on these. And it's real high stakes, not just for LEAs, but for the state as well as a whole. And so we're always trying to look for ways that we can hit our targets a little more in each of the indicators. And indicator 3A, participation rates among students with disabilities, we never hit our targets. The targets for that are 95%. We don't set that, OSEP does, and there's no flexibility on that. And so in digging into that, the non-participation data, we hear a lot from LEAs, from just everybody, that the parental opt-out is a huge factor in why we don't meet participation rate goals, and they're kind of out of everybody's control. And so it kind of gets treated as this thing, well, we can't do anything about it. And so we just kind of give up trying to hit the 95% participation goal. And Tracy and I would like to get people to stop thinking about that way so much. And part of it is by realizing that actually parental opt-out isn't always the main cause for non-participation, which is what we're going to show in the graphs in the next couple of slides. So first of all, a little more background information about the indicator 3A data. So it's based on EdFacts. And EdFacts they expect every student who is enrolled during the assessment window to test, with 2 exceptions. So students who did not participate due to a significant medical emergency. And so those are the kids that get the 107 participation code. And then for the English assessments only, if the student was enrolled after April 15th, so that's the 103 code, then they don't count as a non-participant if they don't test. They go into this category, or basically they kind of get credit as a participant for taking an English language proficiency assessment instead of having to take a standardized language arts assessment. So this is one thing. The 103 code is different than what it is for our state accountability. They are expected to test in math, even with the 103 code. Next slide, please. Okay, so this slide here, and actually all of the slides are going to show a line when it's for counts, and then if it's for percentages, you're going to see bars. So this one just shows counts, overall counts of non-participation among students with disabilities by grade level. And you can see it stays kind of steady through the lower grades up until grade 6. And then it starts to climb 7, 8, and it gets a lot higher in grades 9 and 10. From grade 6 through 10, it doubles. And interestingly, language arts, the non-participation counts are higher in math in the lower grades, and then highest in language arts in grades 9 and 10. Slide, please. Okay, so this is one of those slides. From now on, they all have percentages shown with bars, and then counts shown with the lines. So this graph here shows the most common non-participation types among students with disabilities. And as expected, parental opt-out does make up the highest percentage of non-participation codes. However, it's under 50%. So more than 50% of our non-participants, when we look at all grades together, is other reasons than parental opt-out. Absent, we have this group called that I label as unknown. I'll describe that a little bit more when we get to that slide. And then participant code, it says no test, but really but they didn't do enough, complete enough of the test to get a proficiency level is what that one is. And then the student transferred before testing window, the 112 code, which we've identified a problem with, and I'll cover that as well.
So I think I'll chime in here. So when I sit down, I do quite a bit of technical assistance and sit down with your special ed directors when it comes time for the indicator RDA stuff. And quite often when we get into meetings and we start talking about participation with them, right? So at the state level, right, our number one non-participant becomes parent opt-out. But we've dug into data with some LEAs where they came in with that notion thinking, oh, that is our number one reason why we don't have students participating as parent opt-out. And then as we started digging in to their participation data, we found that it was other reasons, and parent opt-out actually was not their highest. So it really, at the state level, right, we have that bucket is still our biggest, but it doesn't always translate to that being your biggest bucket in your LEA as well.
Yeah, so it doesn't matter at the state level, at the LEA level, it's worth looking at this data and digging into it, because then you can kind of try to see if there's strategies you can come up with for increasing your participation.
I shared this with the SPED director.
No, it was a stakeholder group that's working on redesigning the results-driven accountability scoring system. So there were a handful of LEA representatives there, but it wasn't the entire special ed director.
Are you planning, Sherry?
Oh, how, I was thinking about that. So we need to sit over here on Fireside. So we meet again with special ed directors in April. And yeah, we can present this to them. So they get all of the state data. We do data dives. They have all this information. Your special ed directors also get a report that breaks down your students with disabilities and all the different participation codes they're in. So they have this information, Hal, and we talk about it. I think the biggest reason bringing this to you guys and why it's really super important for you to understand too is because you guys are the ones that are responsible for ensuring participation codes are getting entered correctly. So that's a piece of it. And you'll notice as we go through the data, part of the reason why we're here presenting to you guys is we need to do a better job with entering participation codes, period. So that's part of it. But yes, Hal, we will see about taking this in April. I'll reach out to Leah.
Okay, so this chart here shows our non-participation due to parental opt-out by grade level. And you can see it is well above 50% in the lower grades up through grade 6. But then starting in grade 7, it's less than 50% of the non-participants. And then count-wise, interestingly, the counts stayed mostly fairly steady, except for a weird little dip in grade 7 for the counts of non-participants by grade level. Okay, so some notes about parental exclusion. So as I already noted, overall, about 50% of our non-participants statewide, students with disabilities anyway, is due to the parental opt-out. And those counts stay somewhat steady, just ever so slight increase through the grade levels. And then this table here shows hypothetically, if our only non-participants were the parental opt-outs, if we managed to tackle all the other types of non-participation, we could hit 95% participation in grade 4. For indicator 3, we look at 3 different groups. We look at grade 4, grade 8, and then high school, which is grades 9 and 10 combined. Okay, so this was the next highest contributor to non-participants due to absence. And so this one, we can see it's pretty low in grades 3 through 6, and then it starts to jump up in 7 and 8 and gets higher in grade 10. And then in grade 10, the gap by subject area, it's pretty similar in the lower grades. And then in grade 10, that gap in the count for language arts gets a lot higher. So for some reason, we have a lot more kids being absent for the language arts test in 10th grade. And so that's that 101 code. And LEA should be attempting to get these students scheduled to test on an alternate date.
Add to that, we're seeing that a lot with teachers, with people waiting to the very last week or the last 2 weeks of testing windows multiple times. It's happening with our Apple test, it's happening with WIDA, it's happening with Utah Aspire Plus, and it's happening with RISE. It's happening with Acadience. With our test, waiting until the very last minute to do this increases the chance that you're going to have a higher level of code 101 did not test. Not because the students, especially if they have a regular attendance, when they're here, test them because that's part of what we're trying to talk about. And that's where everyone comes in. This isn't just about students with disabilities. This is about all the kids. So you want to really be messaging this out to your schools to stop having everybody wait till the very last minute to test. Because really the last 2 weeks should be makeups. So when everybody's sending tutoring and testing plans, I would say we're going to try to compact it to 6 weeks, save the last 2 weeks for makeup, and then do it. I remember back in the day, I had kids that were absent a lot. That kid would walk in, it didn't matter what, if they pull them out of my class to go take a math test, pull them out of another class to go take science, they pull them out of science to come take mine, whatever it was, just so that we got that participation, so that they tested when there were bodies in the room.
Yeah, so that absent code, that's one that we really feel frustrated that number is so high. We really want to see that one come down.
And it's really that 9th and 10th grade. And this is where this is important for you guys, where you come into play, as well as our special ed directors too, right? And especially with Utah Aspire Plus. So I know we've been out and we've been observing, you guys, you set certain dates that, you've got schools where, if they're not 9th and 10th grade and they're not doing UA Plus, they come in later in the day, right? You've set up some really strategic things. But the question is, and this goes back to your schools. So you should have that data, right? You should be able to go in and dig down into and disaggregate down to your school level, right? What schools have a really high just absent did not test, especially in that 9th and 10th grade, right? And what are they doing to make up that testing, right? I think when I look at it, I think that is our contributor to that absent did not test in that 9-10. They're just chronologically high numbers and have been since day one. So, Malia and I track this every single year. So that is the most imperative, is those kids that are absent, why are we not making up testing?
So this chart shows the non-participation where we don't have a code. We don't know why they didn't test. And in fact, a lot of times we just don't even get a return record from the vendor. So they're probably just not even making it into the the testing systems to begin with. I'll cover that a little bit more on the next slide, but this chart here shows that the students with the unknown, we don't know why they didn't test. It's fairly low and consistent numbers in grades 3 through 6. And then it really jumps up in 7th and 8th, and then tames down a little bit in grades 9 and 10. Okay, so the students, for the most part, if it's unknown, they probably don't have a test record in any of the test systems whatsoever, RISE, Utah Aspire Plus, or DLM. For grades 3 through 8, the best guess is that most of these students weren't in a course that triggers a test, since RISE is rostered according to having a course that triggers a test. And then for grades 9 and 10, every student in grades 9 and 10 who's enrolled during the assessment window should show up in Utah Aspire Plus or DLM. It's a mystery why there would be more than 0 students who don't have a record that comes back to us from Utah Aspire Plus. And if they didn't take the test, they would have a participation code explaining why they didn't take the test. But in reality, we have a fair number of 9th and 10th graders that don't have a row and don't have a participation code. It's just unknown. It's just a mystery.
Question that somebody asked. There is no secondary math 2 test for 8th graders who have accelerated. So would they be counted in that unknown because no course code? I mean, they have a course, but there's no test. Would they still be counted in the unknown, or would they be counted as they just?
Yeah, they probably wouldn't end up in RISE at all, probably, Han. So they would be in that unknown.
But they would have an English, and a science test.
That's correct. Yeah.
They just wouldn't have a math test.
Yeah. So that's an unfortunate situation.
And there's no code for that. There's no participation code for that because they don't even show up in RISE for those few schools where we have 8th graders taking secondary. There is no test that they.
Maybe secondary math 2 should trigger secondary math 1 assessment.
Secondary math 1.
That's something we should change.
No,
because
they would take it in the year before, correct?
Okay.
That's gonna be low for indicator.
Yeah, but that also affects your state accountability too. I mean, that affects period, right? So like,
I'm looking to see.
so Ann Michelle's looking at that.
Yeah, I could we could pull data and look at that and see how many.
Track that too when we're talking about unknowns. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is if the student is grader and they have a math and science and they don't have a science test, and you look at your data and go, oh, this is a secondary math 2 kid. They took secondary math 1 in 7th grade. You already know that the kid's accelerated. So secondary math 1 in the first semester. Just for secondary math.
And you wouldn't be able to enter a participation code, right? Like if they don't get rostered. So, but if I come to you, right, and we say, hey, why does Johnny have an unknown, right? Like we should be able to answer those questions. So that's kind of the key to it too. And that shouldn't, I would assume that's not a big enough impacting number, right? And especially with indicator 3, but still. And then the other thing here with those course codes, so how this is where I have really hit our special education directors really hard for several years now, that course codes really make a difference, and for RISE, and they get handed, right, the website and the links to those course codes. What we were finding and what they were having troubles with, and I was getting phone calls quite a bit about, is it was those sort of like resource classes where they were putting multiple grades in a class together, right? So they had their 7th, 8th, and 9th graders, or right, like all in a class. And so what they were doing is just lumping them together under one course code and using like the 7th grade course code so where this was really affecting, right, that participation and especially proficiency is that, you've got 8th graders sitting in a 7th grade course. They're getting delivered the 7th grade assessments. And so the participation codes that were going in were like already tested or things like that. And so because then it comes back to us, and on the back end, we validate that below grade level component. And so when we validate that, we go, oh, well, Johnny took a below grade level test. He gets thrown out. So he's not even considered a participant. So that was one of those things. So we've really tried to like get the information to your special ed directors. I present every year at the New Leader Special Ed Summit that that those course codes are really, really important and having them dig into that. So,
and then also last month
Gives them to you every single month in every single AD meeting. The list is there.
And then also, this ties into what I talked about last month with the part-time codes. So when you have kiddos who are only enrolled part-time, if for example, they're only taking math, then it's important that you get that part-time code submitted in through your SIS, because in those cases, we'll remove them from being expected to test for subject areas where they don't have a course in that subject. And so some of this unknown could be those part-time kiddos who are only enrolled in math, but we don't have the part-time code, so we can't remove them from the denominator for science and language arts. So you can review that presentation from last month if you missed it. And then so non-participation due to incomplete tests. So this is when we get the participation code is the 200 or 201. They started the test. They got enough of the test done to count as a participant for state accountability for ESSA, but they didn't get a proficiency level assigned, and EdFacts won't let us count them as a participant if they don't have a proficiency level. So so these counts are relatively low in RISE, but then they jump up a little bit in Utah Aspire Plus. Okay, so yeah, 200 and 201 codes. They started the test but didn't get a proficiency level. And then this quotes the state accountability manual where it says, talks about that a sufficient response it can count as a participant, but then in EdFacts, they can't count as a participant because they don't have a proficiency level. Unfortunately, we don't know the reason why they didn't complete the test. So that's a tough one to come up with strategies for how to tackle that and how to improve the rates at which that happens. Okay, and then this was the 112 code, the non-participation due to transferred before tests. And you can see almost all of this is from Utah Aspire Plus, grades 9 and 10. It really doesn't happen much in grades 3 through 8. Slide. So for this one, what we found out was Utah Aspire Plus has been entering this code after the test window if the test was never started and didn't have a code reported. And test vendors should not be entering participation codes. It's the responsibility of LEAs to enter participation codes, and data cleanup is required for RISE and Utah Aspire Plus. And LEAs must account for every incomplete or non-started test. So, so learning this information about what's been going on with Utah Aspire Plus entering these codes helps explain why we saw so many of these, and that won't be happening going forward. So for last year, for these students, we lack good non-participation information to know what the real reason why these students didn't test. So it doesn't help us with coming up with strategies for helping to get more of those kids to test. But in the future, we'll know more. We won't have this happening anymore.
Can I jump in here really quick? So Anna, so many times it's the jump from untimed to timed. IEPs do not allow extended time, but RISE is not a timed test. Can you elaborate a little bit more about that?
You need to unmute. We need to give her permission.
I just am curious. So like, where do we, Jessica and I, need to support IEP teams in that if we think that's an issue?
To let Anna won't be able to speak because she's calling out of the chat. I don't think she'll be able to speak unless we give her permissions. Is that right?
Can we give her, I don't know.
One of our meeting participants.
Can't unmute.
Yeah, we're working on getting you unmuted, Anna. Give us just a second.
Because I want to understand that better to figure out how we need to support that. And it's the IEPs do not allow extended time is what has me concerned in that. You can come back to that. Do you want to continue? Or you got it? Okay, cool.
It takes a second, guys.
I'm done.
I'm sorry. Wait time.
Okay, sorry. It just gave me a note that said I can now unmute myself. So, okay, so I am in a building that has K through 9. So I have the opportunity to do RISE and Utah Aspire Plus in the same building, which I don't know if there's many that have that chance. So I get to oversee both assessments. So with RISE, that is not a time test. So I feel like our IEP students have the opportunity to have lots of supports with that being, I'm not going to say open-ended, because I also am well aware that we don't just give open-ended and allow multiple hours for testing. I understand that's not conducive to progress as well. Like, we don't just let them go for hours and hours, but they don't feel that constraint, right? There's not a timer that's on the screen. There's not a 10-minute warning. There's not things like that. And then when we have the jump to our 9th grade opportunity, we do have a set of IEP students that do not have extended time marked on their state assessments. And so all of a sudden they go from feeling very successful, having open-ended time on their RISE. And again, I use that open-ended comment with caution because, like I said, we're not giving days and days, but then they go into this opportunity. Sorry, I have students in the hall now, so I apologize for the extra noise. So they go into that testing opportunity with Utah Aspire, where they now have that timer on the screen. I think the added pressure is given to them, where they have never before been identified as someone who needs maybe extended time. And I watch those testing opportunities. It's a small group. We only have about 72, 73 9th graders in our building. And I think that added stress makes them feel like they just don't finish. It's a very constraining testing environment for them. As I go through my reports, my individual student reports, it is generally my IEP students that do not finish and don't get that score, if that makes sense.
Okay, this is Jessica. So a couple of things. That's actually something that you should be talking about with your special education director and your special education teams, because how assessment accommodations are determined is how are students routinely using accommodations in the classroom. So one reason the Utah Aspire Plus is designed like that is because we want it to be more in alignment in preparing students for the ACT, because the Utah Aspire Plus gives that ACT predictive score. So the accommodations align with ACT accommodations. So that's one thing to think about. But also, teachers should be tracking how students are engaging in classroom assessments and what type of timing that they need during classroom instruction. Are some of those students that feel that pressure, students who are unable to complete classroom times like commensurate with their peers, or are they needing additional time? And if so, that's something that you could collaborate with the special education department and say, can you please start tracking and monitoring this so we can make more informed, data-driven decisions for assessment?
And another trick that you could maybe take back to the team to talk about is, so we don't have that timed component with RISE, but like something that the team should be considering, especially when you're getting ready to transition into that 9th grade setting, is did our students take more time on RISE, right, than the other students? And is that a consideration that needs to move forward, right, into that 9th grade year? Now, the other side of the coin is, don't forget, IEP teams, when they start their 9th grade year, right, they know this is coming down the pike, and they know that they're now participating when they sit down in those IEPs, and they're participating in UA+. So let's say, for example, you had your IEP in the springtime, right? So you can come back in the fall, and if you realize this is something that needs to be reconsidered, you can amend, your IEP teams can amend an IEP for accommodations and changing that testing participation at any given point throughout the year. So, but what it sounds like is we probably need to bring this exact conversation to the table with special ed directors too. So thank you for helping us kind of dig a little bit deeper and where that support is. So I think we can address that with special ed directors too, but just note that like, if you are noticing that, like that's something that should go back to that team, right? That's something that they need to reconsider, which doesn't help you in the moment of testing, right? But you can look at adjusting that moving forward.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Okay, was there any other questions?
Yeah, just this last slide just gives you some links for where you can find the EdFX specification files if you are interested in reading up on those. The 170, 578, 79 is the performance, so proficiency levels. And then the 185, 188, 189 is the participation files. And then the next link is for the OSEP, the State Performance Plan Annual Performance Report, Part B measurement table. So that describes the indicators, the 18 indicators that Tracy mentioned that are high stakes for your LEA special ed team, as well as for the state special ed team as well. And then contact Tracy or I with any questions about any of this data.
So, and one thing, if you guys can get down to student level data, right, to help your special ed directors, Malia and I will do that on request, right? We've had some meetings, already some deep dives into data with some LEAs, Joan, wink, wink. We sat down with your group and I'm headed to CASH. We're headed to CASH soon. So we can get down to that student level data, and that's really the best, but hopefully that's something that you guys can help work with your special ed directors too. So you should be able to access that through Tableau. Okay, cool. Thanks, Malia. Okay, DLM. So let's dig into a couple things with dynamic learning maps. So this is our alternate assessment that our students with significant cognitive disabilities take in place of RISE and Utah Aspire Plus and ACT. So that window is open. We've got students testing. It closes June 7th. Or the week before your last day of school. So just that reminder, even these kiddos should not be participating in assessments that last week of school. They should be included in all of those end of year activities. And that best practice, right? I don't think it becomes helpful or smart to pigeonhole, right, our DLM test takers into your same sort of windows that you do with RISE and Utah Aspire Plus. I think it's best to give your teachers and those students plenty of time to test, especially if you have students that have chronic absences, right, or medical conditions, or the kiddo that is headed off to spring break to Mexico and is not coming back. What do we do with that? Get them testing early. I get that call every year from people. With participation, so at one testlet, student completes one testlet, they're considered a participant. Okay, and they actually produce a score report. So this is where it's kind of different from what goes on with RISE and Utah Aspire Plus. At one testlet, produces a score report, maybe 3 to 5 questions, not going to be a valid score report, right? But they're considered a participant. So think about that. So if you have one testlet completed, it moves forward, it goes in. Somewhere along the line, someone should track, right? When that proficiency report comes down, that it really shouldn't be used for programming decisions, but you don't have to enter any other special codes after that, right? So it's only if we have students that aren't completing even that first testlet. Does that make sense? I hope, maybe. Okay, this is another reminder. Here's checklists that you can send out to your teachers, the things that they need to be doing. This checklist can be found on the DLM Administration for Teachers Padlet. Right? We've got to get teachers entered. I'm still in the process of working with LEAs. I'm getting emails daily. We need to get teacher Sally entered, right? We've got to get her training. We got to get her rostered. So we've got to get teachers into the system. They need to complete their training, that required training that is just found within Educator Portal this year. They need to make sure that they have all their students, right? You guys are manually creating rosters. So it's really easy to miss a student on a roster. So when your teacher comes to you and says, hey, I don't see the math testlet for my kiddo, go back and make sure we've added him to the roster, right? So they may get missed there. So teachers should be checking all of their subject rosters for all their kiddos. And then completing that first contact survey and that personal needs and preference profile. So one comment about the first contact survey. So I've been getting a lot of questions. Hey, we've done all the things we need. My teacher's not seeing testlets. Now that our window is open, once they complete that first contact survey, that is the information that DLM uses to determine which level to deliver that first testlet. It's a 24-hour turnaround once the window opens before testlets will deliver. So I think we've got teachers just not being quite patient enough. So once they've completed that first contact survey, give it an overnight turnaround, right? If you're not seeing it within that 24 hours, then go ahead and contact me and we can look at it. But remind your teachers of that piece of it. Avoiding locked iPads. So I've been getting a lot of emails about this too. So if you are using or your teachers are using iPads, right, or Mac products for testing, the secure browser is on there. If they close out of the secure browser Student Kite portal with that little X bubble, right, like Mac's iPads have those bubbles, it will lock down the whole system. It'll lock down the whole iPad. They won't be able to get back into it. They have to call the service desk to get that code. I do not have that passcode. So just send a reminder out. There is a TA document on your district coordinator resource Padlet just for this that you can download it, email it out to your teachers if you're using iPads, and it walks them through how to safely close out that student portal, right? They have to click the close buttons within the portal, and that will not make sure that they can get out and not lock that iPad. So you can zip that to your teachers. Okay, so just kind of an update of where we're at with data extracts, and thank you, Kim, for updating the date on that. So I got her some fresh new numbers yesterday. So we're looking around that 600 and something kiddos not rostered for ELA, math, and then science is less, right? We don't test third grade in science. So we still have quite a few kids sitting in the system not rostered. We have 2,300 students that don't have first contact surveys completed, which means testlets can't deliver, teachers can't test. We test around 4,000 kids across the state and DLM. So about that's half of our kiddos. So far, we have a total of 10,976 testlets completed. Now, mind you, that's all subjects, right? ELA, math, and science. We've come to you, and I know Kim presented for me last month. I was out of the office, but that test information page. So this has been a big thing. We are still sitting about 62% of our testlets that have been delivered out of that 10,000. Teachers were not accessing that test information page. So it literally is click data that we are looking at, and you guys should be able to have a data extract to go check this on your own. That test information, teachers should at least every test that they deliver, click on it. At least just click on it, open it up. Do you need anything? And so we are kind of tracking that, keeping an eye on that. We found that our DLM proficiency went down pretty dramatically last year, right, in that indicator data. And so trying to dig in and trying to figure out why. We had like 50% of our teachers administering DLM last year were new. So, so this is all that information page. You can go ahead. I'm going to have you go forward and back. Sorry. The tips, there we go. I know we're going to move. Sorry. Can you go back? Is it hard to go back? Okay. So like what this tips page does is it gives teachers all the information that they need on what they need to test, including manipulatives. Is it computer delivered? How many test items the student's going to see? It tells them the standard, the essential element that's being tested. So this is the information that the teachers really need to look at before they administer testing.
It's actually required under the Standard Test Administration and Testing Ethics Policy because this is the testing administration policy for DLM.
Yeah, it's part of it. So teachers really need to be looking at that. What I suggest for teachers is when they sit down and they test their kid to have educator portal on their computer in front of them, as well as with the kid. That way, if you are in a space where you're going through multiple testlets at a time, you can at least access it there. So it is really important to do that tips page. Okay, now will you go back? Sorry. And one more. So the other data extract that we looked at was teachers. So my required training. I went through and I filtered out. So all of my active teachers, right? So not removed, right? Not inactive, any of those. My active teachers currently sitting across the state, 58% of them still have not completed training. So that kind of falls in line with our number of students that don't have first contact surveys completed as well. Okay, perfect. Now the next slide. This is your reminder as test coordinators, right? So whether that's you, whether that's your special education director, whether you've designated somebody else, whoever is in charge of that district coordinator role for DLM, right? If you've got teachers in there that should be removed or inactive, please get them out of there. That could be affecting our non-training count. So we need to make sure teachers are enrolled in DLM that need to get those rosters created. We still have 600 and something kids not sitting on rosters. If you have parent opt-outs, you still have to roster your student to your teacher, and your teachers still have to complete the first contact survey because you put that participation code, or DLM calls it special code, right, in the first testlet. So you have to get all students rostered, and all students have to have first contact surveys submitted to get that testlet down. Okay. You have your checklist. You can find it on that DLM district resources Padlet that I have for you guys. There's a checklist produced for you there as well. Okay. Just a reminder, you guys have access to data extracts. So all this data that I just pulled statewide, you should be able to pull yourselves. You can look at all of your teachers that don't have training completed, right? You can monitor testing yourself, right? Where are we at in that testing progress? You can look at students' first contact surveys that haven't been completed. So you can monitor all of that and probe your teachers if need be too. Okay. I don't know how those got flopped, but that was just where they find that test information page. So the test information page sits in test management for teachers, and it's right next to that testing ticket, right, in that testing session. So that's where they find that. Okay, perfect. Again, just all those data extracts, our slides got all kind of mixed up. Sorry, Kim, I didn't get a chance to check everything, but that's okay. Okay, links to your Padlets, right? If you don't have that Padlet, bookmark it. If teachers don't have it, get it out to teachers. There's tons of resources on there. I think that is all I had. So questions? If you're feeling like a piece of broccoli, no?
Purple
Broccoli.
broccoli.
If your brain is like mine and you feel like it's broccoli.
Purple cauliflower.
Or cauliflower.
There is a thing.
So I have to bring a little bit of humor to life, right? So anyway, that's my contact. Please let me know if you have questions. All right.
Yeah, before we move on to our next section, let's take a short break. What time is it now? 10:34. Let's get back together at 10:40. Go for a 6 or 7 minute break. So at 10:40, we'll resume the meeting.
Welcome back. Time for our WIDA fireside. I hope everyone is hearing okay. Can we get a thumbs up? Because I know we've had issues coming off of mute. Yes? Okay, yay. All right, WIDA, first, before we begin, huge thanks for completing the access testing. 1 test down. Lots more to go, but yay. Thank you so much to the to all LEAs that participated in WIDA access testing. We had a lot of students tested, and you know, our ML population is growing, and we're seeing that in the numbers. So thank you for all of your efforts. We appreciate it. So where are we now with access testing? First and foremost, materials, we'll remind you of that on another slide. The big one, Maureen already mentioned this, that's coming up, is the LEA level data validation, okay? You should be receiving emails with instructions directly from DRC. If you do not get those instructions, we can forward them to you as well. And DRC, their customer service is excellent. So if you have any questions about what you should be doing during your data validation, please reach out to them for guidance. And just remember on that first slide, Megan Broken Record, go to that AMS help website because it will guide you through all the changes and how to do everything in AMS now. So, all right. Next, reminders about your materials. Remember, materials are picked up by UPS. If you do not have UPS coming to your schools or your district on a daily basis, you need to schedule this pickup. And the deadline is Monday, March.
It was a week ago.
18th.
We're already off.
That's why I put the deadline on there, just because when I saw that, I figured you put that in there as a reminder to everyone that you're now late.
So you're now late at this time. Yeah, it's been a week. So if you have not sent your materials back, this is now your priority. And you'll probably get some firm but friendly reminders to send them. So there we go. I have had a couple LEAs reaching out about their return labels. You should not be paying for this. If for some reason you do not have your shipping return label in your materials, it's in the little, I guess, sealed baggy envelope that you get everything in with all the directions. If it's not in there, please contact DRC so they can send and issue a new one. All right. Looking ahead, one thing that did not make it on because this is just into us yesterday is you will start receiving most likely today. Kim is shaking her Friday, sorry. Kim said tomorrow. You will start receiving WIDA plagiarism notices. We are happy to say that compared to this time last year, they are way down. So that tells us there's only 13 instances in the entire state so far. No, scoring is still taking place, but scoring started weeks and weeks ago. And we knew, I want to say 3 weeks ago, that 11 definitely happened. And so in the consequential weeks, only 2 other instances have come up. So this is great news. Your lectures about proctoring actively, they're paying off. So we thank you for that. But Kim will be sending out notices for students that have been flagged for plagiarism. Please remember that Utah, our policy is to not score and give credit for the plagiarized item. So they still will get a domain score, but that domain score is potentially not going to be as accurate as it could have been, depending on how much was actually plagiarized. So Kim says those notices are coming on Friday, and Emily will be sharing secure links for you to access that information as well. So again, please remember, we really want you to consider in your planning for next year, because we know that test plans are already being created for next year. Access testing is directly tied to a student's civil rights. So we want you to use the entire test window to get those students tested, because you need to give them ample opportunity to participate in access testing. If you are waiting till the last 2 weeks, let students test, maybe the student is actually sick for a week. Is that really ample opportunity for them to engage in this civil right? please start as soon as you can. We really want you to encourage taking a close look at how you schedule your access testing for next year. And here are the dates already. Okay, so they're always around the same time. So January 7th of 25 to March 7th of 2025.
Next year, just as a heads up to people, Hire Plus window opens March 4th. So there will be overlap for any of your students who are in grades. I did test Utah Aspire Plus the first day or 2 or 3.
Bean dates are merging now. So the sooner you can get it done and give those students that opportunity, the better. And Michelle, there was a question that we received from actually a couple LEAs for wanting to know, to really say we prefer to test later in the window because we want students to have the most ample opportunity to acquire academic English. And Anne Michelle did a little research on this, so I'll let her talk about that.
Yeah, I spoke with WIDA's.
Come join my fireside, please.
Yeah, I looked at a few research reports produced by WIDA and spoke with WIDA's director of research. And there is no evidence that the time in that 2-month window has any correlation with higher or lower scores. So if they take the test at the beginning of the window versus the end, there is no impact on scoring. The test is not sensitive enough to measure that level of incremental change. It is a larger summative.
A larger summative test.
It is. And measuring larger constructs than the, say, like, let's use DIPLS as an example. Very, very sensitive to incremental change. This test is not designed to be that way. So there is no correlation between when the student tests and receiving a higher score. So hopefully that helps
ease
feel confident about testing early.
Yeah. Thank you. And wanted to let you know, we hear you. Great news, because several LEAs inquired about this. And so then we inquired about it and we pushed, and we are making things happen for you. Your materials next year, you're getting them early before any kind of holiday breaks. We anticipate that they will be sometime during the first week of December delivered to you. Once we have that exact date and all the dates for access testing nailed down, we will let you know that, but you do not need to worry about having somebody in a building potentially during your winter break. They will be coming in December really early. Hopefully your winter breaks aren't going right away in December. If not, I'm going to come and hang out with you because that sounds like an awesomely long break. So we will announce those as they come. And I think the only thing that might be affected is the first pre-ID file upload, but it would only be by a couple of days, really, to make this happen. So again, once all those dates start to get locked in, we will start to announce those. So we're excited about that. And then just a reminder about the guidance that we issued. We've had lots of great questions. Hopefully this is helping. If you do have any questions or would like to engage in any further conversations about this, our emails are on these slides. And again, we always say it, but they still happen. Don't apologize for reaching out. We love to support you and we love providing information. So we don't have to put out any fires. So reach out always. And I believe that is it.
Okay, so our preschool assessment. I was like, I went a little fast. I don't have very many slides. Just a reminder about making sure your preschool teachers have been trained.
So we want to make sure we're giving accurate assessments and getting that good, valid, and reliable data. So lots of different options for training. If you're wanting a refresh, they can take that refresh course. I will be doing a virtual training on April 26th. So they can sign up in Midas for that Zoom training. And then we are in the process of revising our PEEP entry and exit. So we did have some change in state legislation, which is asking us to include a growth element. So we have started that process. I'm going to drop a survey link in the chat. So if you have preschool teachers that are currently utilizing the PEEP assessment that you would like to give feedback around the current version of the PEEP entry, and we've done some revision, but we're looking for feedback from the field, from people who are utilizing the PEEP entry assessment. So it's not for public at large. It's not for parents to give feedback. It's for those educators who are utilizing the assessment to provide feedback on what works, what they feel is appropriate for students, what should be assessed. So I will drop that in the chat when I am done with my slides. So just a reminder of a few things with the KEEP. Within a few weeks, the KEEP should have a select teacher requirement. So when they go in, they will now need to actually select their own name within the platform, and they will only see their own data and their own students. So just if they're like, hey, why do I now have to find my own name? That's going to be added in there. And then the KEEP entry and exit will be updated with the new ELA standards. And you will be responsible for printing your own materials with the updates if you still want to give the KEEP assessment and if that's something you are utilizing within your LEA. And then just a reminder that KEEP is not the required kindergarten assessment starting next school year, 24-25, but it is Acadience reading and math. And if you are planning on administering the KEEP entry this spring as part of your kindergarten roundup or whatever it might be, please keep in mind that the KEEP entry and the PEEP exit have the exact same questions currently. And it's not going to be a great test practice if a student takes the same assessment within a couple of weeks of each other because they are enrolled in preschool and are taking it as part of their preschool assessments at the end of the year, and you've given it as part of kindergarten roundup. So please just coordinate with that. If students are going to be taking that PEEP exit at the very end of the school year, utilize that data for yourself rather than giving them another administration of the exact same assessment, and that second score is not going to be as valid. Question.
Natalie on the chat is asking, should we be returning KEEP materials if we are discontinuing?
No. I don't want them back. It's not like they're an open source assessment, right? That's available on our website. So it's not like WIDA materials or ACT where they're like, you have to send it back to us. No, you can discard it. Okay. And then I am offering some KEEP exit training. So we do need our kindergarten teachers and those who are administering the KEEP assessment to be trained. I did an entry at the beginning of the year. I was only going to offer one, and then I looked back at the beginning of the year and I had two, and it was like 200 teachers. So I decided I better offer 2 different times for the KEEP exit. I do realize that April 5th is on some of people's spring break, but it's not everybody. And honestly, my spring is really jam-packed with trainings. So that was like the only Friday afternoon I had available in April. Besides April 19th and the 26th, I'm doing the PEEP. So, and then you can have people to take the Canvas course for that KEEP exit if neither of those training times work for your staff. And then Acadience. So just a reminder that benchmark window does open April 15th. Please do not assess students before then. Please make sure that you are checking and that you are giving the actual benchmark when you mean to give the benchmark, or progress monitoring if you need to give progress monitoring, especially for that maze assessment within M-CLASS. That's a common thing that we get things saying, we didn't mean to administer that benchmark assessment. Well, you did. So it's staying. So it's not an invalid reason to invalidate all of those assessments. So, and then just the parent notifications and that data codes into your SIS system by June 30th. And then, like I said, do have a lot of trainings scheduled throughout the spring and summer. Jared and I and Sid are going to be engaging in a lot of that work to make sure that everybody is prepared and ready and trained for next school year. So this is just a reminder that we do have that list of assessment platform and data reporting trainings. They are available in Midas. Everything, I believe, is all updated. I went through and checked. So everything should be in there with the correct dates and correct times. Please just make sure you have a plan, whether it's you send a few people to training with us and then they go and train the rest of your staff, but just please make sure your staff is trained and that you have determined that they're actually giving accurate assessments. So it should be within 2 points. So if you are doing shadow scoring, 2 people scoring, they should be within 2 points of each other in order for you to determine that the teacher is going to be giving accurate assessments, or whoever is administering that assessment. Please check that before you actually engage in those benchmark assessments so that we can make sure that that data is accurate. We don't want scores that are too low or too high because that really impacts growth as well. And so please make sure people are trained. Yes.
You have one question about KEEP, and that is if they gave the KEEP beginning of the year test.
Yes, the exit is still the required assessment for kindergarten this school year. So it is required. Starting next school year, you could choose to just give the KEEP entry and not the KEEP exit because it is not the required assessment for kindergarten, but it will instead be for next school year, Acadiance reading and math.
Other question, will the ALO have a demo mode to use as well as M-CLASS did?
So the ALO has a central training site where you can go in and do practice assessments for every single assessment at every single grade level. Very similar to what M-CLASS has, that you don't have to have a login, you don't have to have students yet. That's the training site that I will be using as I administer the training. And then we will also have a demo account for the actual data and reporting platform that the data and reporting platform trainings are only designed for your coaches and school administrators. I don't have room to train all of the teachers in the state for those. And then for them to be able to gain familiarity with the data reporting platform and how they set up progress monitoring and utilize the reports within that system to inform instruction. And then they need to be taking that back to their teachers as well. So it is important that you are planning at the school level some training within August or September. I would say as soon as your testing is done, that you have a day planned where you go in and look at the ALO reporting site and show teachers how to find their data, how to look at it, and then how to set up progress monitoring if that's something that they're doing, and make sure that gets planned into that beginning of the year time frame so that the data is utilized. So it's really worthless if we don't actually look at it and use it to inform instruction. If you have people that are paraprofessionals that do not have like a Midas account set up, they can still get a Midas course. They do not have to have a Cactus ID, so you can then register them. So I just included the information on what to do in order to set that up so that you can get people registered for trainings.
We'll put that, I think we'll start.
AD memo.
Okay.
Okay.
Ask that.
Yes. And then just some overall resources. So there's just an ALO assessment and data overview, just kind of going through all of the different parts and components. It has a little bit about how you score the assessments and then about the data reporting platform. The vendor change FAQ. So if you have questions about what historical data I need, what devices do I need, like what's happening, that document's going to answer those. The ALO themselves, I've listed their help center there. They have a lot of resources and information available as well. And then just a data platform guide. It's one page just outlining the different data views. So it might be a handy document to just print out for especially your administrators and coaches, but even your teachers. Like if I want to see this report or this information, where do I go to access that within the ALO platform? MClass had a admin page with like different data reports just listed there that you could then click on. ALO does not have that same type of thing. Theirs are all embedded within the platform itself. All of the same information and reports are there available. They're just not accessed the same way. So that one pager would be helpful. It just is an overall guide.
Couple questions.
Yes.
Will ALO have student demographics?
I don't believe student demographics are uploaded when you do the rostering.
Amplified and no.
They haven't been in the past.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. I don't think they currently are. I will check on that to have a definitive answer.
The question is, are there some options for online training that you are creating?
Oh, so like a Canvas course type thing for online training? There currently is within the Canvas course. I will be updating that because I'm going to take all the other out of that and just have the ALO in there. However, if you choose to have your teachers take the Canvas course, just be aware that they will need additional practice. Like within that Canvas course, I think that I have like one practice for each assessment because it's really meant to be more like a refresh of like, how do I give this assessment versus a training on how do I administer the assessment? So MClass and ALO are very different in how they score things. And so the training is really on how do I score in ALO to make sure that the rules are all the same, but to make sure that I know how the system functions and how I should be scoring things, and to practice to make sure you can do it accurately. That's the big key. So that's why it's, the time that it is, because it really is going to give people time to practice giving the assessment so that they can be an accurate assessor. Of course, if you have people take the training in May, they do need to do some practice again before they give the assessment in August or September, but it really will help cement that for them so that they just feel confident and comfortable with scoring.
Question, can we request that demographics be added?
That is way above my pay grade. So,
you can request anything you want.
Question. You know what?
We've had that question before with MClass.
Sid's gonna come and talk about it. Like I said,
I know it's conversations that we've had in the past with like MClass and what demographics we can include. So some of the demographics that teachers can't have access to about like students, I remember the
free and reduced lunch,
free and reduced lunch and things like that a teacher wouldn't have access to, but only certain people. So there's certain demographics that we've discussed what could or couldn't be included, but we'll narrow down what are the specifics on the demographics that we currently have versus what are some things that may be helpful for people in the reports versus not. I think it's something we can talk with the vendor about.
So to that question, if they have certain demographics.
Yeah. On your side. Come join me, Jared.
if there are certain demographics that you feel would be useful, please let us know so that when we have conversations with Acadians, we can request those as well.
And there's a concern expressed that the in-person training opportunities are not enough to help our district people get trained in time to create trainings.
Okay. So we do have the in-person trainings in June. And then we have many online trainings also in May and June. Is the thought that they need them in April?
That was Joan and Hal agreed. Online trainings are needed now.
Okay. I will look at my calendar and see what might be available in April as well. I'm happy to share slides and things, but if you haven't at least attended the training yourself to understand how it works, the slides aren't as valuable for you. So I would be happy to look and see if I can add something for April. And then that would come out in AD meeting or AD memo. So for that. And then just a reminder that Acadian's vendor change FAQ, like it is really important that you access your historical data if you're in M-Class. Like nobody, not me, nobody will have access to data after June 30th. So please, please make sure. And if you have changed to ALO and you didn't download your historical data from M-Class, I do still have access to that data. It is still within the system because we do have a contract with them. And so I'd be happy to go in and download those files for you and send them to you if you do not have that information. So cannot in July come to me and say, please get me my data. I cannot, I will not have it. It will be gone.
Maureen shared this with the technical at our TCC meeting.
Okay, good.
So
thank you.
To get this out to everyone.
Yes, yes. So I have shared with literacy directors as well. And then just that reminder about those touchscreen devices. Like you do have to have those. Please do not come to me in August and say, I cannot administer Acadians because I do not have touchscreen devices. Like that needs to be in your plans. And then just any additional questions that you have. So.
Yeah, on the touchscreen devices, this is the time of year I think you're probably all aware of, depending on what level of involvement you have with your business administrators, superintendent, or charter leader. The budgets are being determined. We send a communication through Deputy Jones, who interacts with the business administrators about this, because this is really important for you to be able to make sure you have a plan of how many devices you need and what funds are going to be used to pay for those.
So students do not need the devices. It's just your test administrators that need the devices. Okay, the maze assessment can still be taken on a regular Chromebook or computer with a mouse and a touchpad. It does not require a touchscreen device, but test administrators do have to have a touchscreen device, and phones do not work. They are not large enough.
I just said it can be administered using paper and then the score is added to ALO.
Yes. So it does still allow for paper administration, but I will say that we found in our data audit that when paper administration is used, that the scores are not as accurate because there's a lot more chance to make a mistake when you are adding and subtracting and making percents and all of those types of things as you are figuring out student scoring. So it is more accurate and takes less time if you let the computer score it for you. And then just a reminder about progress monitoring as we keeping this in mind with ALO. It does require students to be enrolled in progress monitoring. So you can't just go give a progress monitoring assessment. They do have to be enrolled in the correct progress monitoring benchmark or progress monitoring measures in order to administer a progress monitoring assessment. So, so this is just the guidelines for off-grade progress monitoring. So please make sure they're enrolled in the correct thing and that they're getting the progress monitoring that is really going to inform instruction. And then ALO does have a nice feature that MClass did not have, in that student aim lines will be accelerated. So it's if a student's doing off-grade progress monitoring, and instead of the aim line showing their goal is from the beginning to the end of the year, it will be from the beginning to the middle of the year, and showing that accelerated progress. And then also it does have those off-grade progress monitoring graphs. So it'll actually show you a graph. So if you have a third grade student who's doing nonsense word fluency, they will have a nonsense word fluency graph on their page with that accelerated aim line that you can really check. Are they making the progress they need to make to reach those goals and to accelerate their learning? Because if they're off-grade progress monitoring, that means that they are going to be well below benchmark, and we need to accelerate that learning to get them to grade level as quickly as possible. And then those of you who do use ALO may have noticed this addition of marking accommodations. And for everybody else, starting next year, upon completion of an assessment, there is a little section where you used to complete if there were any additional things about the assessment that you wanted to indicate. There's also now a screen where you need to mark if the student used accommodations or not. And it is for Acadiance's data collection purposes. We may utilize it at the state level as well, but it's really, they want to look at making sure their data sets are as accurate as possible and seeing what types of accommodations people are utilizing when giving their assessments. Couple of things. If an accommodation was given, then you're going to select yes. If no accommodations were used, you will select no. That's going to be the general rule because we don't have a lot of our assessments that are given with accommodations. And then the Utah specific accommodations, you could go to that and then I'll answer the question. Just the next slide. Yeah. So this is really important. Braille is an approved accommodation in Utah, and it can be selected if the assessment was given in Braille. So in the ALO site, it does say Braille is not an approved accommodation, but in Utah, it is. Please do indicate if Braille was used because that's actually great information that we will utilize and Acadians will utilize. Keep going. Okay. Tracy's very passionate about Braille, by the way, in case you didn't know. The directions in home language should never be marked, okay? It is not allowed in Utah. So that is actually not, that's meaning that you are giving the actual Acadians measure scripts for each individual measure in a language other than English. And that is not allowed for the language arts assessments or math assessments. It is not allowed in Utah. So please, that is something we will probably actually pull that data. And if we see that a lot of people are using that, then that's going to definitely be a concern for that because that is not an allowable accommodation.
Your teachers, you're going to have teachers out there, they're going to see that and they think that they can do that. So you guys really need to figure out how you're going to message that to your teachers.
Yeah, so we do not want people using that. And we don't want them thinking that these are accommodations that I can just use with any student anymore, right? Like they are accommodations. The allowable ones are for students who have an IEP or a 504 that the testing team has determined that this is something that the student needs in order to access the assessment. So, and then the last, if students are using the read aloud for math, not allowed in the language arts, but for math, mark other, and then put in the little box, math read aloud. So this is important for anybody who is using ALO, especially, I mean, right now it's live on there. So if you're doing progress monitoring, it's asking for this information. But as you go into the benchmarks, please make sure if you use ALO that everybody is aware of that. And then as we move into next year, that everybody knows how to correctly use the accommodations screen.
So one good thing that's come about this, so in previous years, your students that were taking Braille were told not to enter data into the system, right? And just use it independently. So Acadian said, go ahead and enter the data into the system now, but you've got to mark Braille so that you can actually now kind of start to get some actual data reports. So there's one kind of nice thing about that being available now. So they can mark that.
Yeah,
No,
so
and
that
enter it.
you probably wouldn't do the live administration, but you could enter their scores into the system. So those student scores will appear with everybody else. And you will have those same graphs and the same data reports within the system itself. You just have to indicate that it was given.
Yep.
In Braille.
Yep. So, okay, was that, I didn't know that you had that up there. So are you done?
No, I think I have. Oh, no, I'm done with this slide.
Can I put a plug in? So really quickly, sorry, I'm bogarting the fireside here. I met with an LEA yesterday. I was doing training around essential elements, DLM, and we went down a rabbit hole and they discovered, so it was a special ed director with all their special ed teachers, did not realize that they were supposed to be administering Acadian's alternate assessment. So this is my plug. Will you please ensure that all of your students are participating in Acadians with accommodations, right? If they need them, or they're participating in the alternate. We still should be marking their SCRAM record with that 1% flag if the IEP team determines, right? And they can determine alternate assessment down to those littles, right? Keep as well. Mark that 1% flag, but I didn't realize we still had students not participating. So just double check with your special ed directors and everybody and make sure they're participating. If they did not do BOY or MOY, get them in for EOI under the alternate. Their scoring rubric will be based on the BOY guide though, beginning of the year. So if you need assistance with that, email me, I can help you. But please make sure all of our students, regardless of their disability, are participating in Acadians. Thank you. That was my plug.
First, you have a feedback. It would be nice if ALO added not allowed in all states.
We're currently in negotiations around the specific language. So we'll see what happens.
So
we spent hours on that.
Yeah, Tracy was not happy, but it's because all states use it. And the difference in Utah is if it's not an allowable accommodation, we don't allow IEP teams to make that decision, right? So we kind of have some conflicting ideas and it goes against IDEA, right? So if it's not allowed, we don't allow it. We shouldn't be using it. It doesn't help us with data. So we'll see what we can do about removing that, but I have a sneaking suspicion it's going to stay there. So
clarifying question. So next year ALO will be updated to include the marking of accommodations?
It's current. It's right now. It's live in ALO. So if you currently use ALO, it is there. Please make sure that whoever is administering assessments is aware of it and knows how to use it correctly.
And I think you have to enter if the student have to enter accommodations in the SIS system too, or no?
If they had an accommodated assessment, yes or no. Yes. And then, so that's part of what their codes are in their SIS.
Yeah. SIS too, in the SIS system.
For benchmark, but it's also on there right now for progress monitoring within ALO. Yeah. So, I mean, we're not at the benchmark window yet, but people are seeing it. And so we want to make sure that it's going to be used, is being used correctly, and especially as we go into the benchmark window.
Will there be a place to mark parental exclusion?
No.
That is handled.
That's handled through your SIS codes.
Through the SIS codes. Yep. Right. Yeah. And that's done directly into your SIS system.
Yeah. So it's not within the ALO system itself, because if the parent has excluded their child, there's no data in there. And this comes at the end of an assessment. So you wouldn't have actually ever get to that screen. So you would put in that parental exclusion on your, as one of the codes in your SIS system.
And just, it's not the purpose of Acadians. Like their purpose here is connected to accommodations and flagging the data to be able to research what scores are looking like within the system. So at this point, they're not worrying about the
Yeah, and if you remember when we came out, so the read aloud for math is kind of what started driving this, right? We came out and really asked for it and pushed for it, and your teachers did and advocated, which I think was the correct thing to do. But remember, our cautionary wording around using read aloud with math is Acadiance's cut scores and risk scores, right? Don't include this accommodation. So they really want to be able to disaggregate and really look at what's going on with that. So
yeah, and they're hoping if they get enough people indicating Braille that they can then actually create some valid and reliable cut scores around students using Braille and Acadience. So, okay, next.
That is the next screen.
Oh,
the one before was accommodation.
You're right. Sorry. It's all looking the same. Okay. Please, invalidations in ALO, this was a concern that came up. So just a reminder that if a person does have access to a student, they can invalidate a measure. But there is a record of that invalidation and the prior test results can be recovered. So if you find that someone's invalidating tests that should not be invalidating those assessments, we can still get that data back. And please just put a procedure in place. So as you move into ALO next year, put a procedure in place. This is how invalidations are handled within our LEA. This is the process. And then ALO is going to run a report after each benchmark window and provide it to me. So if you would like that information, like how many invalidations did we have, I'm happy to provide that. Then ALO will require an account manager that will be over both the reading and the math. We are currently setting account managers up for on the reading side, but there will only be one account manager. And data agreements are going to be sent to each LEA mid-April. Please get those completed. They will be sent to whoever completed the Acadience reading survey last year. So if that person's no longer working there at your school or you're not sure, please email me. I'm happy to provide you with that information and update if the person is now different. So the account managers will get access to the ALO platform in July, and they can then start adding LEA users. So assessments or students and teachers will not roster until the first day of school with your UTREX files and all of that. But you can start adding assessment teams if you have a lot of people, and then they can be given assess access only, and then they will not have access to actually individual student data, but they will have access to students to assess them within the progress monitoring or benchmarking. And then I'm turning the time over to Jared.
Okay, so we have, we've talked about trainings. This one's specific to this year, just the end of year data analysis for school leaders. And you can have the information there. So this is a question that comes up quite a bit as far as what the state is paying for. And if you're interested in getting specifically math licenses for grades 4 through 6, there's the contact information for Hillary. And so you have that there. So this is just more for information. We've also, as you're well aware, with reading being ALO specific now, it's more about math and people wondering what ALO has for math. So I've provided here a link to that practice site that Teresa mentioned. So if you want to go in and see what the digital assessing the early numeracy measures digitally looks like, that link, you can use that, or I've also included a link to how you can get it on a touchscreen device. I've also included a link to the device and system requirements. And also there should be in the notes, I'm not sure if in Nearpod it takes the notes as well.
Will be with their slides.
Okay, perfect. So there are links to a webinar that we did back in August as we walk through the ALO system specific to math. So just some information as you're considering, do we want to move from ADM to ALO for Acadience math? And here's some information that can help you with your decision. And then some more specifics here. So in the past, when we've sent out the survey in the spring about what vendor you want to use for the following year, it's been specific to reading. This year, since reading is already determined, it's going to be about math. So there's some information there for you as far as you'll have ALO or ADM to be able to decide. And since we want to get this going a little bit quicker, and since I think, at least from what I've heard from LEAs, with reading being with ALO, people are thinking about having both in the same system. So they've already been thinking about these things. So we'll send out the survey mid-April and have that due May 15th so that we can get this information and get things going sooner. And then just an overall thing for math. And this is just a reminder from last month. The mathematics assessment listserv, we have this. We'll be sharing upcoming development things, both Katie and I, as they come up, and especially as we hit the summer and fall, we'll have quite a few events coming up. So please share this with teachers. And I guess I'm done.
Yes. All right, one note really quickly for UTIPs. I didn't make a slide. It is projected to be scheduled to be down next Thursday, March 28th for a server migration. If that date changes, I will put it in next week's AD memo. So watch for it. If it's still the 28th, I'll put it in there as well as a reminder.
We'll also put it in the notification.
Yes, and we'll put it in as a notification in UTIP so that as people log in, that will pop up on the screen as we will be merging some servers to get things done. For RISE, your summative window is open and again closes June 7th. As it has been mentioned before, we do not recommend testing the last week of school, so make sure that your schools are testing before that last Friday would be great. The benchmarks are still available while summatives are open, so teachers are still welcome to use those. As a reminder that the Spanish adaptive functionality is only available for math and science, okay, for the RISE test. And they should be in separate sessions so that the appropriate scripting is read. On that note, there is new embedded scripting, and we're going to go over a little bit more of that in detail, but I want you to be aware that if you printed TAM information and scripting before last week, it's changed. So do it again. Give it a look, because it's going to be a little different, or your teacher's going to end up reading what the students have already heard through their headsets. Okay. Also, a plug to ensure that your tech readiness is good to go. We've had users reach out where they've updated past a Google platform that it wasn't supported, or vice versa, or a device is no longer supported because it's too old, those types of things. So just make sure that things are up and ready and working before, because it just makes your testing day run a lot more smoothly if you don't have to get a kid a new device when others are already logged in and going. Remember that one of your responsibilities is to monitor testing progress, and you can do that by viewing the status reports of the testing sessions. I've put in here that you can find guidance for that in the RISE Tide Guide. Starts on page 135 for you. You can create reports that show students who have started, students who have not started, if anything is paused and waiting to be completed, those types of things, so that you can keep on top of it. And it will reduce your use of participation codes if you can, keep on top of them. So there's a plug for that too. New, again, for our embedded scripting, it's been updated so that students are listening to the majority of the directions from the test. There is still a short paragraph that is read to students by the teacher. Then the scripting of the test is read. And then there's still the short script at the very end that's like there's 5 minutes left of a testing session, that type of thing. So be aware of that things are going to look a little bit differently. Because of this, students, now they've been required to be provided with headphones, but we know it's not always happening. Now they're definitely required to have those headphones, or they will not be receiving that scripted portion, which creates the standardized testing environment, okay? They cannot be skipped. The students should be listening to them. Again, all of the updates are reflected in the current TAMs that are posted both for RISE and for Utah Aspire Plus.
And it starts every single time the student accesses a session. So just like they were supposed to have been reading the scripts every single time, late students who are doing makeup tests, anybody, the kids are going to hear the instructions over and over and over again. So
the new functionality that is now within the RISE system is you can view student enrollments if a student is enrolled in just one school or if they are dually enrolled in multiple schools. There is guidance for you in the Tide Guide now on page 97, but I included a screenshot here that if you click the student enrollment dropdown that's on a student student account, card, their personal information, the demographic thing, you can click that drop down and it's going to display if the student is single enrolled or dual enrolled so that you can see if there are possible other enrollments in other schools, which might be hinder why they're rostering with someone else rather than with you. For applying participation codes, this is your refresher that in RISE, in the preparing for testing, it appears as its own little drop-down menu in the orange option to view and edit participation codes. When you are doing that, you'll just search for the student using the filters at the top of the screen and then use the edit pencil to then bring up the participation code drop-down. And it looks like the following slide. And you can then select the participation code that you want applied. If the student doesn't appear though on a roster, Maureen and I get these questions a lot. Check the parental exclusion status because more often than not, that is one of the reasons they're not appearing because RISE is removing them from the testing ticket so they can't even have a test generated. So when Johnny comes in and he doesn't have a testing ticket, check his parental exclusion status to see if it was entered and just possibly forgotten about. As a reminder, 214 is new. This is going to be the parental exclusion code for if the student has already tested, but now that test needs to go back and be invalidated.
Or is in the middle.
Okay.
Or is in the middle of testing.
Yes, or in the middle, has already begun rather than it being requested prior to testing, okay? And then also as a reminder, 201 is for any accommodated test, and that includes the Spanish adaptive version of the test. You also do not need to apply code 200. The standard participation code will be applied on the back end of things. You can leave the 200 code alone. You don't need to put it in if the student is participating in standard participation. When it comes to summative reporting, as a reminder that all content areas have immediate scoring, with the exception of writing for grades 5 and 8 for the first 500 submissions, because each of those are going to be hand scored, or if it triggers a condition code. We've actually had a lot of questions about the prompt copy match participation code, which basically means that the student has copied more than 70% of
70% or
70% or more of the content that was provided to them. So just know that that's what that means. We've had some questions come up about that. Okay. Next slide. More reporting guidance. I included some reporting guidance in the training that I held in February. I've put the timestamp there if you want a refresher. There's also the reporting guide that is provided in the resources on the RISE portal. New for reporting, there is also a new writing component that has been added, which is called writing dimensions. And the writing dimensions component will show you the essay type that the student was provided. It will show you the rubric item as well as the point value. If you would like more guidance on what the writing dimensions new component also entails, there's more guidance in the reporting guide. It starts on page 158, but basically it's going to allow you to drill down a little bit further than you have been in the past when it comes to the rubric. Do any of my ELA friends want to add more about that? Okay. Also in there, the dimensions are going to show you the lowest and highest point values as long as enough information was provided to collect for it, okay?
Okay, we are winding down our meeting. So for RISE accommodations, I get emails every single day. These are entered through the TIDE system, and instructions for entering them are very clearly, explicitly outlined with screenshots in the TIDE user guide. There is not a hard deadline for requesting state-approved accommodations, but I please beg you to give me a few days' notice. I have, over the last couple of weeks, literally been getting 24 hours notice. And if my day is booked all day long, I have been doing these at night when my kids go to bed. And it's just putting you in a predicament. I will bend over backwards to meet a deadline for a student. But if I'm sick or something comes up and your student is testing the next day, that's problematic. And what it also tells me is you are not putting these settings and students are not engaging in training tests when you are making these last minute decisions. So as we talked about earlier, it's really important, especially for students with certain accommodations, to be allowed to use these training tests. So when I get these very last minute requests, I know that is not taking place at your LEA. An LEA level user has to be the one to submit those state level requests in TIDE, and I will reject them or approve them. If they're rejected, typically it's really just a wrong SSID. A lot of times people put like an LEA number, but that's typically the reason.
I don't feel like going fast. I'm tired of being told to go fast at the end of a meeting. Just a few little science things so you're aware of it. We have an edit coming on the science OER textbooks this summer. When they were originally written by our teachers, they were written really well, but written really fast. And we've looked at them and realized that a lot of the questions in them really are too much like textbook questions. They're not the type of questions we like to see with our science educating going on in the state. And so we have teachers coming in, about 80 total, to help add science performance tasks to this. I wanted to give you a heads up because we're hoping to get it edited in time for fall. It's going to be a close push, but we've actually even assigned people to help edit it as it goes. But if you have any questions about that, please reach out to myself or Jared. We're happy to answer any questions about that. We're pretty excited about that work. Also, we've got my next slide, the ongoing assessment development. We're developing a lot of clusters. The ultimate goal is we want to hopefully end up with about 100 brand new clusters in the assessments, including being able to build our benchmark banks. And we start running into trouble when we're trying to recruit teachers, especially elementary and high school, where it's hard to get teachers to come out for that. And so when you see that announcement come out on our listserv, if you're on the listserv, please feel free to forward that to any administrators or educators you think can get out to that. If you're not on the listserv, just check myself or Jared's signature line. It's there's a link there to join the listserv so you can get those announcements. The feedback we get from our teachers every time is that this is the best professional development I've ever had. I now know how to better teach my standards. So please, any questions? They're like, no, hurry up. Cool.
When's lunch?
So soon. For Utah Aspire Plus, a couple of things. I have added the URL to this slide because we are still getting people who are trying to access either Pearson Access Next, or they are Googling Atom Test and it takes them to somebody else's Atom Test administration site. So it looks great, but the test code and password don't work because it's not a Utah one. So make sure that you are using the ltr.atomexam.com URL site. And please, oh, please make sure that you are communicating with your administrators and your teachers that Pearson Access Next is no more. The Pearson Help Desk received multiple calls the last 2 weeks regarding Pearson Access Next accounts. And we're talking like 6 different LEAs have had people reach out. I can't access. So please make sure they know That's not what they're using anymore. Also, remember that with Utah Aspire Plus, the block list, it's imperative to ensure that you are using devices that have everything closed, shut down. Apps cannot be running in the background. Things like Spotify, Teams, they have to be shut down. They can't just be closed. This is specifically difficult sometimes on Apple devices because it's not showing on the screen. We think it's not open, but it's running in the background somewhere. And so sometimes restarting the computer will help. But if you're having trouble with that, please make sure that you're also reaching out to the Pearson Help Desk so that they can assist you as quickly as possible. Okay, next slide. The same one. There we go. A reminder with embedded scripting, even here, that the Utah Aspire Plus has embedded scripting as well. Again, there is still a paragraph that has to be read by the teacher or proctor beforehand, but the student will then listen to the majority of the scripting through the system, okay? They can't be skipped. Also, with the headphones, no Bluetooth. We are in the thick of our Utah Aspire Plus window. We've already had I want to say 35,000 tests administered. So a decent chunk have been done and submitted. We close May 10th. As a reminder, with this one, Spanish adaptive functionality is provided for all content areas. This is another one where we know that people aren't using training tests when they respond with various questions, because those are also, the question samplers are also provided with Spanish functionality if you select it to do so. So make sure your students are using those because it's super, super helpful. We have also started Pearson office hours with the transition to Adam. We know that there's some frustrations and some difficulty issues getting things done in a timely manner, or if the TAM isn't quite as clear yet, and I know we're providing as much clarity as we can and it's going through multiple updates. But if you have burning questions that you would like answered, hop onto our office hours on Wednesdays. Pearson vendors are there, as well as myself and Kim, to answer any questions you have regarding the administration or accessing reporting, things like that. We want to be able to help and support you as much as possible with the transition to the new system. When it comes to sending your teachers the welcome emails, remember that with Adam, teachers only need to log into the system to access the reporting. They're not logging in for test administration. So this is only to access their reporting, which they will have access to 24 hours after their students submit. So if you've already had students submit tests, the reports are there, okay? It's a pretty simple process. You'll just need to select the users that need that welcome email sent. And then up in the little kebab menu, you select the option to send the welcome email or the password reset if you know you've already sent it. As a little plug there, if you are sending the welcome email, those login credentials provided through the welcome email will expire after 7 days. The password reset will expire after 24 hours. For participation codes in Utah Aspire Plus, remember there are 2 different ways that you can enter those. This first way is in administrations under code. This is a good way if you're just doing 1 or 2 students really quickly and it's prior to their test administration. This is an easy way to do it, okay? I would not recommend this for all the time, but it's a great way to do it if you're receiving a parental exclusion really quickly, to go in and just do it really quick beforehand. The bulk way, go ahead and go to the next slide. I went over bulk step by step in our February meeting, so you can go back and rewatch that if you need to. But just remember that under operations in Session Explorer, there's a place for accountability codes, which is the same as our participation codes, okay? You do not need to apply to code 200, still same thing. 214 is the parental exclusion if they've already started the test or if it's been finished and then needs to be invalidated. Next slide. Inside the Adam system, they can also be changed. Okay, you'll just need to log in, go to operations through the Session Explorer, search the SSID, click on the little red box, and you can remove the code by clicking the little X that's in the corner, and then just apply the change. Okay, you don't need to reset it to standard administration. You can just remove it. But what you will want to do, and I put 204 up here specifically, You will still want to reach out to the Pearson Help Desk just to ensure that the test will then be generated for the student if a parental exclusion is being rescinded, okay? Because we want to make sure that it wasn't invalidated prior, and so the student no longer has the opportunity. So take it off, reach out to the help desk just to make sure that the testing opportunity is then going to be reloaded to the student's account. When it comes to monitoring test progress in ADAM, there are two different places that I would recommend that you look, and this is all outlined in our score interpretation guide that's posted on the Utah Aspire Plus Resource Center. You can go under progress. Progress is going to show you overall totals. The second place is activity. And this is the one that I really like the very, very most, because I can set a custom date range. So I can check on testing for one specific day, or I can check on my entire window or a week's worth of testing. It also will update almost real time. It updates every 5 minutes. So you're getting a really good at a glance of what tests are being worked on and what tests are being completed. And the total numbers are shown by session underneath every one of your organizations that you are assigned to be the LEA director for, okay?
Okay, so same thing for Utah Aspire Plus accommodations. Oh, did you go?
My mouse is.
Okay, just kidding. When your teachers go to log in, if they want to look, they're going to look for performance under reporting, and that's the only one they're going to have access to. This shows them the subject scale score, the proficiency level, the predicted ACT range, as well as the readiness prediction and standard level performance, which you haven't had for Utah Aspire Plus. So it's kind of cool. There is guidance for teacher users, school administrator users, as well as district level users in the score interpretation guide that is current on the Resource Center.
And there's like a million questions in the chat about, do I need to add teachers? Should I not add teachers? Go to the score interpretation guide and decide if you need to add them. Remember, the only reason you need to add teachers is so they have access to these reports, which many teachers are using to improve students' grades when they get the score reports. And this is the quickest way.
And your teachers, the majority of them have been already added to the system through UTREX. If you've been reading my AD memos, you know that. You'd also know that if you are missing a teacher, you'd want to reach out to Maureen and she can look and see where they are. So check back the last few weeks.
Magical Maureen. Okay, so for Utah Aspire Plus accommodations, again, there's no hard deadline for them, just like RISE. However, I did want to mention kind of a caveat for the ADAM system. The system updates at the top of every hour. So say it's 8:15 in the morning and you're entering a last minute accommodation and the testing session starts at 8:30, that accommodation is not going to show up in the student's test. However, you can reach out to the Pearson Help Desk if you are in a crunch and need that accommodation applied immediately. The Pearson Help Desk will do a push to apply that accommodation so you don't have to wait until the top of the next hour when the system loads again. Okay, it's also important to remember after students complete testing, apply the code 201 to the student's test. Next page. And as a reminder, there are certain accommodations that you have to do additional orders for, like Braille, tactile graphics, large print, human reader companion books, and those are in the ADAM system. Pearson asks for 2 weeks notice when you're placing those orders to ensure the shipment is delivered to you. However, if you know, this is an action item, if you have a student that you have not ordered Braille for, please, please, please put that order in immediately, because thankfully and excitingly, we have more students participating in Braille this year than we anticipated. So we are already maxed out on our printed Braille books. So please, please, please make Braille ordering a priority so we can ensure effective shipping on the student's testing date. Okay, yeah, that's good enough, probably.
Getting a little woozy with the back and forth, but we'll make it. ACT, just some reminders. Test event 1 is finishing tomorrow. Based on the sounds of crickets I've had, it seems to be going really, really well. Also based on the lack of emails I've been getting. So awesome. Let's keep that up. Hopefully get some karma going there. Testing dates coming up for test event 2. These are just reminders. These same reminders are in the scheduled events. This is copied word for word out of there, I promise. And so you should have received materials this week for testing event 2. And then the dates to return all your materials back to ACT are there. Moving on. Test event 3 is going to happen before the next AD meeting. Awesome. So here are the dates for test event 3 also, just so you have them with in terms of events coming. This one goes around a lot quicker in terms of being able to return things. They got mostly because this is your makeup one, right? We recommend not having your kids go and test event 3, but if something happens and you need to do makeups, it's there. And so this one usually goes a lot quicker. And by then we've had probably 90% plus of the test already stated. Next one, moving along. Reporting schedule, remember, reporting takes 3 to 8 weeks after the students have tested. And typically that's around 3 weeks for online and about 8 weeks for paper. And so if you're still testing using paper, that will take a little bit longer. That is reported in the ACT success system. And please, 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 please remember before you contact me or the help desk, you need to make sure you tell them it's for the spring, not the fall administration, and that it's for the ACT contract, not the entire state, if you have that option also, because if you don't put in those as a selection, you're not going to get the results you're looking for. Students also get their results in their My ACT account, My ACT accounts. And then final accountability score, people always contact me about this. This doesn't get set until ACT sends us the data file in usually July. And it could take, I think it took a couple of months this year because of all the stuff swirling around U-Trucks and everything to get that done. So just be patient for the accountability score. I have nothing to do with that, honest, I swear. So if I could make it happen with snapping my fingers, I would. Next slide. There is one new accommodations. There is a couple. I don't get to finish.
Okay, I did have one more thing I wanted to say about accommodations for Utah Aspire Plus in the ADAM system. If you work with the TIDE and RISE in ADAM and Utah Aspire Plus, there is a difference. So when you submit a state level request for an accommodation for RISE through the TIDE system, I set that. It's different for Utah Aspire Plus when you submit a state level required accommodation request in ADAM. I only approve it or reject it. And if I approve it, you set that. So who you is in your LEA is probably the person who made the request. You have to go back into ADAM and check your notifications to see if that request was approved. And if it was, go back into that student setting and apply the accommodation. It will be released and you can do the check marks. Okay. All right, so for ACT accommodations, just ensure that you're verifying student accommodations are correct before they begin their ACT sessions. Really can prevent problems. If you do administer the ACT without the correct accommodations, you are required to fill out a test irregularity report, and this is in the ACT test administration manual. If a student completes the ACT without their correct accommodations, or really for any state assessment, you need to take corrective action in your LEA. And it's just a reminder that if your student's engaging in that assessment without their required accommodations, you're failing to provide FAPE to that student. Next. Okay, so these are just kind of some common examples that happen with ACT. One is that you, the LEA, failed to submit needed accommodations. So our recommendation in that case, if it was the fault of the LEA for not applying for accommodations, is we usually recommend that the LEA pay for the student to participate in an ACT national testing date, so that through that process, they can request their accommodations, and that will keep them in alignment and legal with their IEP. Or for 504 English language learners too, that's also recommended. Another thing that comes up is, say students were approved for their ACT accommodations, but you notice within the testing environment that they're not applied. You should reach out to ACT first on this testing day. You can also reach out to me too, especially if there's any delay in the customer service. And then another thing that happens is, well, hopefully you're being proactive on the action on the slide before this, and you're checking accommodation before. But if you do notice that accommodations weren't applied, stop testing. And those then need to become team decisions. It's recommended that you contact your special education director and make a phone call to parents and communicate with students on how you want to proceed. You can have the student resume testing and continue, or they can just stop testing, and then you can revert to getting them set up for national testing so that they can have appropriate accommodations. I think that's the last slide.
So look at that, 3 minutes to spare.
Only because I clicked the slides faster.
Significantly less time.
Right. Well, thank you to the Assessment Accountability team for putting all this material together and supporting our LEAs the way that you do. And thank you, our assessment directors, for your collaborative work with us and allowing us to try to support you as you serve the students in your communities. Have a wonderful rest of the day and probably a spring break before we see you again.